on the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen, making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. It's still spring. Time for good ideas. I think it's in spring that we supposedly generate interesting new ideas. Certainly the company of the moment, OpenAI, the company pioneering AI technology, is celebrating spring, promising that its new technology will let our imagination run wild. And that, of course, is an issue that divides both technologists, politicians, and the creative class. Is AI going to be a boon or boom for creativity, or is it going to undermine all our creativity? One man who's been giving a great deal of thought to this is my guest today. Jeremy Utley, describes himself as facilitating epiphanies for over 20 years. He's done it as a professor at Stanford University in the famous D School. He's done it as an author. Everyone will be familiar with his 2023 best-selling book, Idea Flow: Why Creative Businesses Win. And he's doing it with a recent white paper, How AI Can Help You Solve Problems Better. He's joining us from, appropriately enough, the mountains of Santa Cruz, just between the coast and Stanford University, down the coast from me in San Francisco. Jeremy, welcome. Are you having a good spring? Creative spring? Have you had many epiphanies this spring?
Almost too many to process, Andrew.
There's a religious quality to this. In the old days, people who facilitated epiphanies would join the church. Are you a religious type?
I am indeed, actually, yes.
Tell me more.
I was raised on the lap of a non-denominational Christian preacher. And so my father actually when I was born, he was a preacher. He went from, as we like to joke in the family, from the Lord's hands to the devil's. He became a corporate litigator when I was in 5th grade. And so my world went from being a preacher's kid in Oklahoma to a litigator's kid in Dallas in the blink of an eye. And one thing that I observed is his capacity for captivating folks' imaginations through storytelling was something that I tried to imbibe as much as possible, even to this day.
So what exactly, Jeremy, is an epiphany? I mean, you boast about facilitating these things. What is it, or what are they?
I think it's one of those moments where you find yourself going, but it's that moment in The Matrix when Keanu Reeves says, "I know Kung Fu." It's that feeling of, where did that come from? And for me, I didn't have that belief in myself. I was financial analyst by training. I went to the University of Texas at Austin. You can see my hat in the background there. And as a finance guy, did strategy consulting, investment banking, came to Stanford Business School as a strategy consultant, and had my heart set on financial kind of economic empowerment in the developing world. And my life got derailed when I was in a design school class at Stanford, which was then in its early days at Stanford University.
The famous D School.
The famous D School, as it were. And I was doing a project. Actually, I remember the project. It's fall of 2008 at this time. And I was doing a project reinventing the ramen noodle experience. And there was a particular moment, which we can go into it if you want, but there was a particular moment where an idea occurred to me, which caught me so off guard and so by surprise, and so delighted me at my own undiscovered or previously undiscovered capacity for realization, that it actually derailed my life. And I had the privilege of being invited to join the teaching team of the Stanford D School in 2009, a year after I graduated from business school. And I had the privilege of beginning to facilitate these epiphanies for others. I first taught the first course at Stanford that was attended by a representative from every single graduate program at Stanford University. It's called Design Thinking Boot Camp back in fall of 2009. And I realized it was an incredible privilege and gift to help others discover that they too, not just me, not just the recovering MBA, but they too were capable of this moment where an idea occurred to them that they didn't know was inside them or that could be inside of them. And from that point in 2009 onwards, up to this day, it's one of my great passions and joys in life to get to help others discover that thing that they go, I had no idea I could think of something like that.
And what was that idea? The
For
original
me?
epiphany for you?
Okay, Andrew, I will tell you the truth. My knowledge of ramen noodles was a typical undergraduate's knowledge. It's a fast meal that I slurp down on my way to class. It costs 25 cents. You know, it's like the cheapest thing I could find in the supermarket, right? I buy them by the pallet at Costco. And so when I got this assignment from the D school, you know, I'm a business school student, you know, it's very, you know, proper. They said, you've got to reinvent ramen. I thought, oh, I'm an expert on ramen because I've eaten a lot of ramen before, right? And then the first part of the assignment, you'll love this. The first part was visit an Asian supermarket. Being from Texas, by the way, I didn't even realize that there were Asian supermarkets. I'd never, you know, never been to one. And then two, visit a ramen shop, a ramen restaurant. And I thought, there are restaurants that serve ramen noodles? Aren't they those packages that I got at Costco when I was an undergrad? So I go to this location, to this restaurant, and there's a line around the block. I'm going, what are these people waiting for? You know, and I wait in line, and I was there with my wife.
Whereabouts was this? In Palo Alto?
Downtown Mountain View, a restaurant called Maru Ichi. And they actually, they process their ramen. They create their ramen fresh every day. And they make a big display of it. And there's a, you know, line around the block. And I can remember thinking, what is the big deal? You know, and you can appreciate the epiphanies coming. And I don't even know it because my world is, you know, the imagination is triggered by unexpected inputs. And what the D school had done for me was it had plopped me, it had put me on a collision course with a bunch of unexpected inputs. And I remember sitting down at this table for the first time. I ordered ramen off of a menu for the first time in my life. And they bring in this huge bowl. And the important utensil was the spoon, not the chopsticks. And I of course, am thinking, you know, you eat the noodles, you go. But I started noticing this weird slurping sound all around the restaurant. I'm going, what is happening here? And this thought occurred to me. It's about the broth. All my life, my emphasis was on the noodles. And it's a quick carbohydrate, get it on the go, right? It never even occurred to me to drink the broth ever. You know, it's just watery, you know, powdery stuff that I had in college, right? And as I look around this immaculately kept restaurant where people have been waiting in line, they're all slurping this stuff delicately, like it's a, you know, like it's something special. And I realized there's something about the broth, and that little insight, which to me was a completely unknown phenomenon, set me on this collision course where ultimately, the other part of the assignment, if you really want to dig into it, the other part of the assignment is they made us as students, we had to draw at least 50 ideas before we could move forward in our process, which I thought was patently absurd because I thought, oh, if you have one or two good ideas, you're in good shape, right? We're smart people here. We're at Stanford. We're graduate students, right? And so I'm, you know, kind of doing my quota, as it were, and somewhere in the midst of this quota, which, as you know, is a core of this idea of idea flow, by the way, generating a volume of ideas. In the midst of this quota, somewhere this connection occurred to me that, wait, what if the on-the-go ramen experience could be about the broth too? You know, what if college students could have a broth-forward experience? And somewhere it occurred to me the chopsticks could be hollow and telescoping, and they could become chopstick straws, where not only do they enable noodle eating, but they enable the broth consumption. And Andrew, in that moment, it may not sound like a big deal for you. In that moment, I felt like if you had told me I'd been given the superpower to fly, I wouldn't have felt any different. it was so unexpected and so interesting and so innovative to my mind that I thought, well, how did that happen? And I became obsessed with, well, wait, where did that come from? and I've since come to learn that, there's a method to the magic, so to speak. And that's what I've been really privileged to get to share with, now millions of students around the world over the last 15 plus years.
Did you ever see the movie Tampopo?
No, I did not.
Oh, you should see it. But it's almost a religious paean to the broth of ramen. And you obviously hadn't been to Japan.
I had not been to Japan. I've since been, and I've fallen in love with it. But at the time, I mean, it just goes to show, right? I mean, we don't know what we don't know. And one of the magical things about the design process that we teach at the D School is it's a process by which you can uncover the things you don't know. And it's really incredible for folks. My wife, just as an aside, my wife's a fashion designer. I like to say capital D designer. She's a really gifted. She's working in Illustrator and Photoshop and CAD and things like that. And she would go to, she'd have to go to Paris. She worked for a kids wear brand. They'd go to Paris for inspiration. And I always thought, this is a boondoggle. They just love macarons. It's absurd. You don't have to go to Paris to get inspired, right? Because there's no cell in my spreadsheet as a financial analyst. I couldn't, she said she needed inspiration, but where do you put inspiration in the spreadsheet? Right? It doesn't make any sense. And what I realized over time as I started working at the D School, started teaching and interacting with a number of creatives and things like that, learning from them, your inputs matter a lot. And we can think about creativity and innovation as there's kind of this obsession with the output. But the truth is, what great creators know is they're input obsessed. And so there's a number of these kind of paradigm shifting realizations that have been at the core of the book and my practice and my own personal transformation over these last 15 years.
You are Mr. Epiphany, or certainly Mr. Facilitator of Epiphanies. Is this, you talk about it as a creative experience, which you certainly rather like tasting, perhaps, the high quality ramen soup, the broth after eating it out of packets. Is it the same, Jeremy, as what a poet or a filmmaker or a novelist or a painter experiences? I mean, you focus mostly on creativity in the commercial world. You talk about your wife, who is a fashion designer, so sort of crosses over between the arts and business. But are we all writers, filmmakers, business people? Are we all in the same game of trying to facilitate epiphanies?
I think we are all in the ideas business, is what I would say. And when you realize fundamentally what is an idea? I mean, we can come back to this, but an idea is a certain thing. And when you realize that when you're looking for a solution, what you're looking for is an idea. I mean, I've got 4 daughters, one of whom, if somebody says, let's eat sushi, she says, that's a good idea. And you go, wait, what do you mean idea? Because sushi's not new, right? We think idea, we tend to think new, but it's a contextual thing, right? It's a connection. It's an unexpected placement in time and space. And so when you realize that we are all in need of ideas, for example, you're a copywriter, right? You don't have anything to do maybe with anything creative, but you need lines for headlines, right? Or you're an HR professional and you're stuck on how should we improve our performance review practice at our company. You're in need of ideas. Or you're in finance and you go, why aren't my coworkers filling in their expense reimbursements? Well, you're in need of ideas. Or you're a parent and you're flummoxed because your toddler keeps doing this thing and you go, how can I? You're in need of ideas. Wherever we are, anytime we're looking for a solution, we're in need of ideas. And to me, the tragedy is we have relegated creativity, so to speak, to the arts. And we've said, oh, I'm not creative, but I would say all of those challenges from HR to finance to parenting to product design to arts all call on the same fundamental cognitive process, which is contextualizing potential solutions in a new place, in an unexpected way. And to me, in that sense, we're all in the ideas business, and all of us have an innate capacity, and we can cultivate that capacity. Some of us, it's dormant, those muscles have atrophied, but we can almost always, I mean, I was in Austin at South by Southwest recently, And I was sitting at the bar, just trying to get away from the kind of scene, sitting at a bar, having a steak at a bar. It was the only seat available in the house. There's a couple sitting next to me, and they kind of strike up. I'm trying to be kind of, a nobody. I'm on a panel, I'm speaking. And so in the South by context, I've kind of got a little bit of a reputation, but in this bar, I can kind of be nobody. And this couple next to me goes, "Hey, so what are you here for?" I said, "Oh, South by." They go, "Oh, what are you doing?" I've got a book and I've been talking about it. And then when they realize my subject matter, the guy is like a hedge fund manager or something, and he goes, "Oh, she's the creative one," and she kind of smiles demurely. "Well, I'm in graphic design." Da, da, da. And I said, "Well, hang on a second." I said, "Have you ever had a moment where you go, where did that idea come from?" And he goes, "Yeah, I mean, we were doing this M&A deal a couple of months ago, and everybody's trying to figure out how to get all the parties to the table. And I had the solution. I kind of said it, and and it worked." And I said, "Call it creativity, man. That's creativity." And he kind of sat back and he goes, "I guess it was pretty creative," right? And to me, the fact that the guy in the hedge fund doing M&A deals there's not even an impulse to call on his creativity. The same creativity, by the way, that David Byrne leverages when he writes music, or or Bono, or pick your favorite artist, or Beeple as he's drawing digital images. The same underlying creative act, Mr. Beast when he's producing YouTube chart-topping videos. The same underlying cognitive process is happening there, but the guy at the hedge fund doesn't call it creativity. And the bummer about that is the next time he's stuck, he has a much more limited toolkit at his disposal than someone who knows what I need is ideas, and I know I have all of these methods to get them.
So you're suggesting, in a way, Jeremy, maybe I'm putting words into your mouth, that we humans, we like to be surprised. We like to be shaken.
I was not suggesting that, but I do believe, I don't know if we like it. What I do know, picture Johannes.
To be shaken from one thing to another, to enter a new world, to go from, using Plato perhaps as a guide, to go from darkness to light. We seek light.
I believe everyone likes that feeling of, I don't know where that came from. I've never met somebody who disliked that feeling of being the person who everybody goes, "Oh, yeah." Everybody likes that, right? I mean, that's if that's what you mean by surprise. I mean, I think there's also
dislodged. We like to get somewhere else. Maybe not travel literally, but to know something, or to experience something, or to be something that we weren't the moment before.
I'm teaching a class right now, which partially I think answers your question, called Transformative Design. And it teaches grad students the process for self-discovery. What we say is we take the design process that we use to design products and services and innovations, and we turn it on the most important project of all, which is your life. And we teach you how to bring that design process and that design mentality into your life. And what we did today, we did an awesome, one of my favorite exercises called Watch Your Language, which we can go into in a second. But students were debriefing and they were thanking me, profusely as they were walking out of the room at the end of class today. And one of the things I realized is we right now we're in the middle of a project called Self-Discovery Missions, where they have this long menu of different activities that they can undertake in order to discover some part of themselves. And I said, we've called this project Self-Discovery, but my goal, more than just self-discovery, is to equip you to be a self-discoverer. Because the truth is, yourself is not some fixed thing. And I would hate it if you got to the end of this class and said, "I found it," as if it's some fixed thing. Because the truth is, you're going to continue to hurtle through time and space, developing and adapting and growing. And what I want is to equip you with a set of resilient skills so that you can continue to learn who you are and that sort of thing. I think in that sense, absolutely, I agree with your statement.
We're speaking with Jeremy Utley, Mr. Facilitator of epiphanies, in theory and in practice, writer or speaker, teacher at Stanford. I want to remind everyone that when it comes to epiphanies, I would strongly suggest you read Liberties, a wonderfully new, innovative quarterly of culture and politics. Going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then we'll be back with Jeremy We've explained what epiphanies are. We're going to talk about the relationship between epiphanies and AI. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second with Jeremy Utley.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. I guarantee you'll have one or two epiphanies while you read it. And we are talking to an authority, perhaps the world's leading authority on epiphanies, Jeremy Utley, co-author of Idea Flow. And he's been turning his intellect to the question of AI. He has a piece out in this month's Harvard Business Review, and he has a new white paper on it. It's called Evaluating the Practical Impact of Generative AI on Ideation and Team Problem Solving. That won't put you to sleep. Nothing will. Jeremy, what is the relationship between AI and epiphanies? Of course, AIs aren't human. It's one of the great questions of the 21st century. Your white paper and your recent work, and indeed your new podcast, is focused on how we can use AI to facilitate our own creativity. How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, for starters, I think, Andrew, one of the important things to realize is most folks don't. So if you think just theoretically, if you know, just to give a brief lesson on innovation for folks who aren't familiar, the greatest driver of the quality of one's ideas, so how good are your ideas, is primarily a function of how many ideas do you have. This is work pioneered by the great Dr. Dean Keith Simonton, who recently won a Lifetime Achievement Award from Mensa, okay? The organization that awards IQ points. He's brilliant, and he studied breakthrough thinkers across time and geography and culture and function. And one thing that he found is the greatest predictor of the quality of thinkers' ideas was actually the quantity of their ideas. Quantity is what drives quality. He calls it the equal odds rule. And this theme recurs in nature. And so if you take for a second the premise that the way to get good ideas is to have more ideas, then if you're, which I believe deeply, which I think the research proves empirically, then you get this fascinating realization. I mean, we released Idea Flow in October. ChatGPT comes out in November. And all of a sudden you go, wait, we have an intelligence capable of basically inexhaustible ideation. Surely teams that leverage it are going to get to better solutions, right? Because, and for me and my research partner, brilliant Kian Gohar, we thought we were conducting a research study on, are teams 2 times better? Are they 5 times better? Are they how many times better are AI enabled teams than human teams? That was the research we thought we were going to be conducting. And as we conducted studies, both in organizations in the United States as well as in Europe, one of the things we discovered is most of the time, the truth is AI-powered teams weren't any better than human teams. In fact, sometimes they were worse.
What is excuse the dumb question, but what is an AI team?
An AI-powered team, meaning a team that's given access to generative AI as a tool in their toolkit, right? So they're able to, for example, we take a group of teams that are all seeking to tackle a strategic sales problem in an organization. So take a manufacturing organization, one of the organizations that participated in our study. They say we have this key manufacturing challenge. We have 40 people. We divide them, in half, 20 in this group, 20 in this group. And then we divide those 20 in further groups, 4 or 5 teams of 4 or 5 in each. And we give them a structure for brainstorming and problem solving, which we facilitated, Kian and I, and many, hundreds, thousands of times across the world. We give each the structure, but half of the group only has each other and the structure and the tools that we give them in the briefing that the problem owner gave them. The other half gets the tools and the structure and the briefing, but then they also get access to generative AI. And the question is, how much better? That's what we thought the question was going to be. How much better are the teams that have access to generative AI at solving this challenge? And what we found is most of the time they weren't any better. And sometimes they actually did worse. And they did that for predictable and preventable reasons that actually relate to not the technology, but to human cognitive bias. And so I'm kind of a nerd, as you might tell, but there's a cognitive bias called the Einstein bias, which has been demonstrated since the 1940s. Abraham and Edith Lutyens identified this using this fascinating study called the water jug problem, whereby they demonstrated that humans tend to fixate on a pattern and ignore more elegant, simple, effective solutions when they're looking for a pattern to be solved. And so the way this manifests itself is oftentimes people fixate on an early idea and they don't actually push for the best idea. That's how this practically manifests itself. And what we saw is with many teams, when they were using AI, they would actually fixate on suboptimal ideas more quickly, and they would generate less ideas and have a lower variation.
So they're lazier. I mean, so is the conclusion really that AI doesn't change much, that we're just as lazy or energized with or without AI?
It's or there's an asterisk. Often that's the case. And as we dug into the data, one of the things we found is there's a subtle difference between the teams that underperformed with AI and the teams that outperformed with AI. The teams that underperformed because it came down to their orientation towards the AI. Teams that underperformed approached AI like an oracle, like it had the answer. They asked a question, they got the answer. They go, whoa, it's pretty good. And that only took us like 3 minutes. Let's go get coffee. The outperformers didn't treat AI like an oracle. They treated AI instead like a coworker, like a thought partner. And they engaged in an iterative dialogue whereby they achieved more ideas and better ideas and worse ideas than their human counterparts. And so to us, the question became, or presently is, how do I acquire this language, this language of innovation? How do I acquire it? How do I learn to speak AI?
Or another way of putting it, and you've written about this, is how do we chat with bots? How do we interface with these algorithms, with these artificial people? I sometimes ask this of guests in our age of AI. Jeremy, how could you prove that you're not a bot? How can you prove to me and our listeners that you're not just a programmed algorithm?
I think it's increasingly difficult. I'm not even attempting. I'm not largely baited by the question. So maybe I am, is what I would say. But I think the question of how to chat with bots is actually, I want to come back to this. We actually titled the working paper, More Chat, Less Bot, because the problem is most folks are foregrounding the bot rather than the chat, rather than the conversation. And it's this conversational fluency that's important. We had I don't know if you've got it here, Andrew, but we just had a piece in the Weekend Wall Street Journal. We got the weekend essay in the Wall Street Journal recently. And our piece was on how AI can help you with conversations you dread. And the basic protocol that we recommend is take a conversation you dread. Maybe you've got to deliver hard news to a family member or tough feedback to a coworker. What you can do, and we kind of walk through this protocol in our weekend essay, but you can actually ask AI to interview you about your underperforming coworker, right?
Let me find that. Well, continue speaking, I'll find it.
So an underperforming coworker, you may need to give them feedback. What you can do is you can ask AI, please interview me about, if I've got to give you feedback, Andrew, I could ask ChatGPT, please interview me about Andrew so that you can create a psychological profile of Andrew, because ultimately I'd like you to pretend you're Andrew in a back and forth role play. So I have AI interview me about you and our interactions to the point that AI feels like it could believably play you in a role play. I could review the profile and all that stuff, refine it, whatever. But then I go into a back and forth conversation and I say, okay, now I want you to play this role that you've just profiled. I'm going to give you some feedback and I want you to actually act like you're Andrew in this conversation until one of us thinks the conversation's over. And then we'll break scene. And I'd like you to then give me feedback from Andrew's perspective on what's the main thrust of the feedback that I'm giving you and how did it land with you? Yeah, that's the article. And then I'd like to ask you for your feedback from the perspective of Dale Carnegie, author of How to Win Friends and Influence Others. And I'd like to ask you for feedback from the perspective of Chris Voss, how to, never split the difference, right? Or whatever. You can do that. And what we've discovered through a number of experiments is folks over time, take for example, a good friend of mine who was going into a salary negotiation. He had the opportunity to take a new job. He's going to move his family. His family was eager to move to a new area. And the offer that he got wasn't that great. And his family was kind of saying, let's do it. We got to go. We got to get here. It's a way to get to this new state. And he called me, and he didn't call me to talk about ChatGPT. He just called me to chat as a friend. And increasingly, I find when people want my advice, I'm not answering their question directly. I'm giving them advice about how to interact with ChatGPT to get advice. And I just said to my friend, have you role played it with ChatGPT? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you can ostensibly role play this salary negotiation with ChatGPT just to see whether your points resonate or land or where your leverage is. And he goes, hang on a minute, I'll be right back. He called me like 20 minutes later. He says, okay, this is super interesting. What should I do now? I said, well, now why don't you ask ChatGPT to offer less concessions and to be a little bit more hard-nosed as a negotiator and to be less accommodating and role play again. He came back 20 minutes later. He said, dude, and we hear this consistently. He said, one, I didn't realize how much leverage I had and what my real points were. And this helped me solidify my points. But he said, more importantly, I'm no longer nervous about the conversation. And we hear that again and again, that these conversations we dread actually because we don't know how they're going to go. And generative AI gives us this incredible opportunity to have multiple at-bats and different angles to the conversation to test things out with an approximation of the personality on the other side. Not that it's exact, but a lot of the jitters come from we have no dress rehearsal. We have no ability to, and then what my friend did is he went back to ChatGPT and said, based on all the interactions we've had, can you please now, ChatGPT, as a negotiations expert, give me an outline of my points in the order and emphasis in which they should be delivered that I can use in my real conversation, right? He not only got the raise, he's actually moved his family, just for the record. So they're now in the new state. He's in the new job and with a better salary. But I think it would be a breakthrough. I think it would be a breakthrough kind of procedurally, even if that hadn't happened, because I see it so many times now. And the point again, Andrew, is it's about the conversational dynamic. And what most people miss right now is because technology has programmed us, we tend to approach ChatGPT just like we approach Google. It's not Google. If you are basically using ChatGPT as a Google substitute, my friend, you are not even scratching the surface. You are not even in the kindergarten of generative AI. And you really have to.
It's like your udon before you went to the restaurant.
Exactly.
There's something sad about this, though. People often use friends or loved ones to have these conversations. Is this a cause, do you think, or a consequence? It seems no coincidence that we're relying on machines, and I'm sure you're right about conversations we dread using a chatbot. But is this a reflection of our increasingly isolated, lonely lives? I know that chatbots are particularly popular in Japan, perhaps the loneliest, the most isolated place on earth, where everyone enjoys a nice udon soup.
It's a good question. I would say I don't think so. I think where I find myself using this tool, just to speak personally, is like I have a network of mentors, incredible business leaders and spiritual leaders who I've grown to know and trust over the years. And there will be times where I find myself going, I wish I knew what Carl thought, right? And then I text Carl, he's not available. And what I started doing is, hey, he's not available, but I bet I could get an approximate response from ChatGPT, right? And I can at least.
Oh, you create who's Carl?
He's a good friend and mentor of mine.
So you could create a version of Carl online? You could.
I'm not, by the way, I'm not implying that we should be replacing our friends. All I mean to say is there are many times where our synchronicity doesn't work. And if it's a choice between practicing now and never practicing, this gives us a chance to practice now. If Carl will just say, hey, I'll call you in an hour, maybe I can do it. But for example, I had a really important decision to make that I had to make within 30 minutes. He's not available. And it's either I don't have anybody to role play this with, or I have somebody. And that to me isn't about isolation or loneliness. It's maybe, if anything, it's about the busyness of our lives. I don't know how many people you could call upon, and at a moment's notice, they drop everything they're doing. But it tends to be the more experienced and the more, credible source of information, the more busy they are and the harder they are to call upon at a moment's notice. And so, I mean, I talk to Carl on a regular basis. And
you could have asked your daughter, though. Her response probably would have been, let's go and eat some sushi.
Or that, well, as long as the chopsticks are hollow.
Well, finally, Jeremy, interesting conversation. It strikes me that you're a performer, a very good one, actually, a very successful one. How is AI helping you? Maybe not so much have the difficult conversations that you're dreading, which you wrote about earlier this month in the Wall Street Journal, but rather improve the performance, the performative quality of Jeremy Utley's art. I mean, you're an artist rather than a technologist.
That's true. I take that as a compliment. I would say one of the ways in which I have found it tremendously valuable is in giving me feedback. So I recently had a big keynote. I was at a healthcare conference earlier this week, delivering a keynote to thousands of healthcare CEOs, and or hundreds, I should say. I didn't know whether my opening story had the hook that I wanted. And so I just went into ChatGPT. I said, hey, you are an expert speech coach. I'd like to give you the first 2 minutes of my new keynote that's on the impact of AI on innovation, or innovation in the age of AI. That was the keynote title. And I'd like for you to give me feedback on the emotional resonance, whether it's engaging enough, and if there's anything you can improve. In fact, I'm going to ask you to rate my opening 2 minutes on a 0 to 100 score. And then I'm going to ask you to give me your reasoning for why you gave me the rating you did. And then eventually what I did is I'm going to ask you to rewrite the script for the first 2 minutes such that it would rate 100 out of 100 for you. And it was a really incredible back and forth where it pinpointed a couple of key points that I'm doing it right now. I have this tendency to not finish a statement because I'm on to the next already. And it picked up on that. And it said, it actually pointed out a couple of moments just like that. Right now, I just said, it picked up on the fact that I have this tendency, and I went off, right? It actually pinpointed that and said it would be more emotionally resonant and less jarring to your audience if you made sure to finish a statement before you made the next statement.
That's interesting. Talking to you, there seems to be something very American about AI as a technology of self-improvement. That's how you're using it, and that's how you're thinking of it. Sort of Dale Carnegie version 2.0, digital version of Carnegie's idea of self-improvement.
The other thing that I would say that I find myself doing quite often, which is quite helpful, the world that I live in, folks are constantly sending me articles, research papers, studies, recommendations, and my inbox is not quite manageable. And so sometimes if I see a note, like you posted Matt Abraham, right? Matt's an amazing podcaster at Stanford. He sends me a 40-page research article. I know that I want to read it and I want to get back to him, but who's got time to read a 40-page research study?
So you get your AI to summarize it. Finally, Jeremy, and this comes back to a question that I asked earlier that you politely dodged. You're clearly, as I said, a performative artist. You're in much demand. I'm sure you're very well paid to do your keynotes at healthcare conferences. You teach at Stanford. How easy ultimately will it be to replicate yourself so that you, to borrow a word from Stanford, from Silicon Valley, that Jeremy Utley can scale infinitely?
I'm trying. I'm looking for all sorts of ways to scale myself. I found a few, and I'm actively deploying them and learning which ways are most beneficial, most impactful, most helpful to my students, to my clients, etc.
Isn't that a bit chilling, though? Shouldn't there be some scarcity to Jeremy Utley? Once you create the Utley bot, you're everywhere and everything.
I don't know. It's a good question. I would say I feel acutely the pain. I just had an invitation just yesterday, a program at Stanford that I would love to contribute to, and I can't. And it's not a matter. It's not a matter of what they offer. I can't do it. They're not offering anything, by the way. But even if they were offering something, I can't do it. I'm actually delighted by the thought that perhaps, and I believe that I could be of value to those students, and perhaps many other people could as well. And maybe I need to get better at cultivating my recommendations, right? That may be another way to play it. But I would love to be able to avail myself to that group of people in a way that, as to use your word, scales me. Because the truth is, I'm going to be somewhere else, and it's a meaningful initiative that I wish I could contribute to.
He's an expert.